Have you ever been lost on whether it's your responsibility to pay on a first date? Like, it feels like the masculine thing to do, but then in the modern day, everything's become so confusing. And I feel like I messed this up on my very first date, and despite 2 months of texting and us both being super excited to go on that date, I feel like I messed it up in 2 hours, and part of the problem was that I messed up on this question of whether the guy should pay. So, I've been on a few more first dates since then, and I've gotten a bit older and I've realised there does seem to be an ideal way to do it. So I'm going to break down in this video exactly what I do now and what has been so much more successful, and then I'll even tell you what I did in that first date that went completely wrong. So, my approach that I have now is that on first dates, I don't pay for everything, but I pay for the majority. And the reason for this is, like, why do I pay for most of it? And I think part of that is that there's still this sense that the masculine guy should pay. The guy is turning up, and there's still that sense in the air that he is the one that leads the interaction, so he should pay a little bit more. And one of the things that it communicates is that you are just a bit generous and you're not stingy, and you're not going to be completely broken financially by such a trivial thing as buying an extra cocktail. But what it also does is it communicates your interest. I remember listening to a podcast from a female dating coach, and she was helping one of her clients, and they were talking about a date she went on with a guy, and they went to just get a simple coffee, and he sat there and made her awkwardly wait whilst the bill came, and he was just not doing anything, and then suggested they split it. And it was like, oof, that seemed to take a hit, because what she felt like that communicated to her was that he just wasn't interested in her. And then when he tried to message her back a few days later, her and her dating coach basically decided, because, I don't know, he didn't really want to convey any investment or interest in her, they passed him up as an option. They said that even though the date went well, and the fact that he tried to get in touch a few days later, this one moment of him just being kind of unnecessarily stingy, it was like a $2 or $3 coffee, just turned her off. And that won't be the same for every girl. Some girls will be fine with that. But it's an unnecessary thing for you to lose out on a potential relationship just through being a bit stingy. So then that asks the question of, well, why don't you pay for everything then? Clearly, if it has such a big benefit that if you pay for the girl, they'll know you're interested, they'll feel desired, you communicate you're generous, and a guy that has at least the resources to cover something trivial and small, why don't you just pay for all of it? Well, this is where we encounter a problem that I see a lot of guys fall into, and what I fell into for my first date. Guys will often try and pay excessively on dates, pay for everything, and pay for quite elaborate things to try and convince the girl to like them. It can sometimes come across as just way too much, because the guy is insecure about himself, so he's going in trying to pay for everything. Because that's what I did on that very first date. We went to the cinema, which I also don't recommend, dumb move, and we arrived there, and I insisted on buying the tickets, and I insisted on buying all the snacks, and she wanted to contribute, because that's the thing, when we get a girl to add a little bit, then she feels like she's contributing. I do this now that I'm quite aware that I want to pay for the majority of a date, but I really like it if somewhere in this date I can get a girl to pay for something, because what that communicates is, hey, I'm invested in this relationship, and so are you as well. Like, the relationship is something that sits outside of the two of us, and we're both investing into that. The guy that insists on having to pay for everything, he's basically saying like, oh, I'm paying for your time. I'm so gracious that you came out. I'm going to pay for everything and make it so easy for you. And it's just a bit of a turn off. When you suggesting like, let's go through what I did on one of my most recent dates. We went for a cocktail first, and I bought the cocktails, and she was fine with that and was like, cool, I'll get them. And then we went to an arcade afterwards, and to buy some little like tokens so we could play air hockey, she paid, she offered, and I was just like, yeah, cool. And it was just like, it's not the same. The cocktails cost more than the tokens, but we were both happy because we were both investing in the relationship of something coming out of this. What it also does is make a girl feel more comfortable, because if you're paying for everything, she starts to feel awkward, like maybe she owes you something. It creates all this unnecessary tension. If she feels like she contributed on the date, it relaxes her a little bit more. It doesn't feel like there's this dynamic of where he's paying for her, he owns her in some kind of way. So the best framework I've ever found is this. It's like I go onto a date and I try and have a way where it's like, hey, I end up paying for this and then she gets this. It can just be like you get the first round, she gets the second. Or I've done it of, hey, I went and got cocktails and then there's this really cool ice cream place around the corner and she got them. You don't want to be this guy that's so firm that he is buying everything no matter what, because this is a really good way to kill any future opportunities you'll have with her. Because if, say the bill comes, and maybe she offers to pay and you're just like, hey, don't worry, I've got this. And then she's like, no, I really want to pay. And then that's fine. You say okay. Or maybe she's like really insistent, like, no, I split the bill. It's like, when she said no, if you suddenly then decide to push back against that, this sets off the biggest red flags in her head. Because think about it. She set a boundary of something she wants to do. She said no, and you've pushed against that. Like, for girls, that is a really big red flag because it's a symptom of what could be to come in the future, that if she says no, you don't respect that and you keep pushing, which for any girl will just set off warning lights for obvious reasons of why she wouldn't want to spend more time and get intimate with you. So if you get this wrong, it can be big enough to kill any future relationship. So go in with the mindset of like, hey, I'm going to offer to buy the first thing and I'd like to get the majority of stuff, but I really do want her to pay for something on the date so she's invested as well. But also, if she says no or says she really wants to split, like, it's fair enough to do like one of just like, hey, let's split it. It's like, no, I've got this. Then she has the opportunity to just go, oh, thank you. But if she pushes back, then don't push back against that, because it's disrespectful and will make her concerned for any sort of future with you. And that's super important. So that is how I would break down how you should pay on a date. And if you're worried that maybe you're broke and you don't have that much money, but you still want to date beautiful girls, well, I actually have a video where I've broken down all the cheapest dates that I do, because funnily enough, the cheaper dates often work better. There's this rule that the length of a marriage is inversely proportional to the amount spent on the wedding. So the more you spend on the wedding, the shorter the marriage often ends up being. And I think it's the same for first dates, that if you spend a lot on a first date, you won't have that long relationship because you're trying to hide who you really are. So instead, I recommend you check out this video where I break down all the cheapest dates that you can have so you really connect with a person and that you don't need excessive amount of money to date hot girls.